Let's get started. Our first speaker is our youngest, but by no means is that the most remarkable thing about him. It's not that, but his steadfastness when faced with significant opposition. Last year, he battled with the Ryerson Student Society to appeal a decision that rejected the ratification of a Men's Issues Awareness Society at that campus. Sparks flew. He continued to push and fight, and produced stories in the Metro News, the Globe and Mail, and the National Post. So we're privileged to have him here today to share his story, moving beyond the gender wars, the Ryerson experience. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Arriola.
Well, I guess first I'd like to thank Cafe for all the outstanding work that they do and for inviting me, not just in Toronto, but all across Canada. Specifically, I'd like to thank Justin Trottier, who's doing the presentation in the other room, and his staff for all the support that they've given me, both personally and for the group. I started last year the Men's Issues Awareness Society at Ryerson, a group about which I'll be talking about tonight. So this is the first time I've ever been asked to speak for 30 minutes. I don't think anyone has ever asked me to speak for that long before. But anyways, if I get lost, I could always just go back to Star Wars facts. So for the speech, I really had to sit down and think about what I should say and really just plan it out. And I apologize in advance if it seems like I'm reading word for word what I've written down, because I promise you that I am. I simply can't remember 30 minutes worth of material, and it's simply remarkable to me that there's people out there that can. So for the speech, I came up with 3 parts. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about me and what led me to start this group. Then I'll talk about my experiences in starting the group and where we are now. And finally, I will talk about the lessons I've learned in what I'd like to call the gender wars. I don't think I'm a particularly remarkable guy. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think I'm a pretty sweet guy. I've just never been particularly great at anything. If I could win an award, it would probably be for how many participation awards I have. And that's a lie, because I don't even have that many of those. So there's been sort of a pattern in my life where things don't always go according to plan, but I end up somewhere unexpected and sometimes welcomed. It's kind of like waking up in Montreal after a night of having one too many. It's like, yeah, it sucks that I'm here, but at least I got crepes for breakfast. So this metaphor certainly rings true for my group, which has slipped into a coma at best, and is almost certainly dead now. I just don't really have the heart to pronounce it, so. In many ways, I think this group succeeded in its most basic purpose, which was to open discussions on men's issues. We were able to do that not just on a local level, but also on a national one. In other ways, this group's current status as a vegetable, waiting for someone to pull the plug, is due to a culmination of failures that might have been avoided if things had gone and been done differently. People have asked me why start a group about men's issues. And I'm sure many of you have heard this sentiment before, a general disregard for the plight of men and boys. If you had asked me a few years ago what I thought about the disadvantages facing men, I probably would have laughed in your face. I had certainly heard about the disadvantages facing women in school and in the media. Knowing about the plight of women and the difficulties that they've gone through has become so ingrained in our culture that for people in my generation, it is to some degree or another common knowledge, as it should be. Empathy for other human beings begins with increased knowledge of their experiences. If it hadn't been for the internet and my unhealthy obsession with it, I probably would have never been exposed to the idea that men face their own unique set of challenges and disadvantages. The mainstream media certainly wasn't reporting on it at the time. Even today, you'll notice that the media focuses on the controversy behind addressing men's issues rather than the issues themselves. So for all you bloggers, YouTubers, and keyboard warriors, thank you for exposing me to things that the media has yet to catch up on. And don't let anyone tell you that activism isn't useful. It was only a couple years ago, so I still remember when all of this first got exposed to me. Now, I don't usually watch too many YouTubers, but this particular video intrigued me, not only because of the topic, because it was a topic I had never heard about, which was this concept of male disposability, but also because it was a woman who was talking about it. It was very easy for me at the time to dismiss other men talking about the plight of men as simply being bitter and misogynist. It was much harder to dismiss a woman who had seemingly little to gain talk about it. Now I'm sure many of you are aware of Karen Straughn's videos. She just did a presentation just now, and it's simply amazing to me that I'm in the same conference as her. So here's this hockey mom talking about how men have been treated throughout history like meat for the grinder. It was insane to me that anyone could even utter those words. But I kept an open mind and I listened to the arguments being made. Now for those 15 minutes or so, my eyebrows got an intense workout from just how much they moved around. For those of you unfamiliar with the term male disposability, it refers to attitudes that see men as protectors of society. It's the view that men, and only men, should sacrifice their lives, health, and emotional well-being for the greater good. Not only that, but also that they should be proud to do so, and that it is an honorable thing for us to do. It is this attitude that has made men dodge artillery fire and develop trench foot, or plunge down to their deaths working on high-rise buildings due to the lack of safety equipment and procedures. As a man, I can't count the amount of stupid things I've done just because someone uttered the phrase, "Don't be a pussy." Institutions around the world also support these attitudes that pressure men into certain behaviors. From active laws that force men into conflicts that take their lives, to the lack of laws that protect men from hazardous work conditions. And you'll notice this particularly in other countries. There's no doubt in my mind that male disposability, whether it's intentional or not, is state sanctioned. All it took for me to start caring about men's issues was accepting and embracing this term, male disposability, as a real phenomenon. Terms like this need to be embedded in our dialogue about male victims, because it is only through change in our language that we can start gauging a change in our attitude. It didn't take long for me to move past this video and start to pay closer attention to men's issues. I began to read about the high rates of suicide amongst men, how boys were failing in school, how fathers had been dragged through the court system. I also saw how these issues intersected with other factors, like how black and native men are being incarcerated at higher rates than other people, and how homosexual men and trans people face greater risks of violence against them. I discovered just how polarizing these issues were for people, often dividing friends and family ideologically. There are those that see the advancement of men's issues as a progression towards equality, of some men's issues as a progression towards equality, and those that see it as the opposite and inherently anti-woman. And of course there are legitimately hateful people all around. Even my own mother had reservations when I told her about my group, until I explained what it was really about. I naively thought that if I could convince a stubborn feminist and socialist like my mother that my group was a good thing, I could convince anyone. But I'll get more into that in a minute. Around this time I was seeing how events held by Cafe were being violently protested, with spitting and shoving and juvenile acts like pulling the fire alarm, which hopefully won't happen today. If anyone can remember the mess that was the Warren Farrell protests in 2012, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I started to become angry at the hostility towards these events, from people who clearly had no idea what they were about, and who were basing their opinions on secondhand information from anti-male blogs. I became even angrier when I saw that these people had a lot of power in society and in our institutions. I saw how men's issues groups were trying to form and being shut down by every university in the country, and many still are today. I had never planned to become the president of men's issues group. I had never really joined any groups in university, and I like to keep to myself. In hindsight, these qualities definitely didn't make me #1 draft pick for the position. But there wasn't really anyone else who was doing it. It wasn't until I saw Kathy Young's do her presentation, The Politics of Gender and Victimhood. I don't know if anyone saw it. It was also hosted by Cafe. That I really thought there was nothing stopping me from starting a group. Well, except that I had no idea how to run a group. I remember speaking with Justin Trottier about my own interest in starting a group on campus that day. There was something about having the chair of this big organization telling me that it was a good idea that actually made me want to do it, and I pretty much did it that night. Now, I didn't know much about starting a group, but I did know a thing or two about social media. I created a Facebook page, a Twitter page, an email account, and a Reddit account. Then I started posting on all these platforms. The message was clear and simple. I was interested in starting a group, and I would be on campus recruiting soon. To say that this unleashed the gates of hell would be an understatement. I had no idea what I was in store for. Now, I already knew that this topic was touchy for many people. I had seen the protests. I wasn't stupid enough to think that there wouldn't be opposition to my group. If anyone here has ever spent any time online and entered a public forum on gender politics, then you'll know exactly how much of a mess it can get. No one seems to agree about anything, and everyone just keeps shouting over each other. I wanted an end to that. In my mind, the internet was the problem. It was the barrier that kept us from connecting with each other on a human level. I wanted to take away the comfort of sitting behind a computer screen and make people realize that there is a human being on the other side who cares just as much as they do, even if they don't agree. Maybe I was just too optimistic and thought that if I could just make my group the right way, that everyone would just come together holding hands and sing Kumbaya in support of it. Obviously, this wasn't exactly the case. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't successful to some extent. As soon as I announced the group's formation, I had both student newspapers almost immediately phoning me and asking me what exactly our group was about. At the time, even I didn't know. So I did what I usually do in these situations, and I made it up as I went along. I knew there was going to be criticism of the group right off the hop, and I really tried my best to avoid these criticisms through inclusiveness. It's hard to say that a group follows a particular ideology, especially a hateful one, if everyone's invited. Aside from egalitarian, which is the general belief that everyone should receive equal rights and opportunities, I avoided other labels, like whether we were a feminist or an MRA group. I simply encouraged everyone to join. Anyone could join so long as they followed their university and the RSU policies. Not sure if I said the RSU is the Ryerson Student Union. Particularly those against hate speech. Through the media and our social media pages, we were able to broadcast this message for all to see. The reactions were mixed and the calls never stopped. I realized almost immediately most of my efforts this year would be fighting a PR battle, rather than actually running a group. I needed help. With some guidance from the administrator for campus groups, I set out to write a constitution and recruit members. Armed with not much more than some sign-up sheets, pens, and a small handmade billboard, I planted myself on campus for 2 days and recruited. Luckily, I had a couple brave friends who stood by me through this all and helped me sign people up. I must have talked to hundreds of people. Most of the ones who talked to me were supportive of our group, but even if they weren't initially. And of course there were those that just gave us dirty looks and yelled insults at us. It's probably the first and only time I've ever been compared to a white supremacist by a white man. What's funny about that is he said this about me and 2 Muslim women sitting with me who were very much not white. That said, I managed to convince almost 50 people to join the group and secured 2 executives I needed to create it. Not only that, But the people who joined were just as diverse as I'd imagined, from all types of ethnicities, genders, and sexual orientations. The group was nearly split 50-50 between men and women. Even my two executives were women. Not intentionally, but I can't lie that it really helped our image. I thought, great, how could anyone criticize a group so diverse of being one particular way? How could anything go wrong? Well, let me tell you, we weren't singing Kumbaya yet. There were other groups that were out for blood, and they didn't care about what we had said. I learned that day that if you don't choose your place in the gender wars, one would be chosen for you. Pretty soon after we announced our interest in becoming a group within the university, both the Women Trans Collective, a prominent and established group at the university, and the Feminist Collective, a newly formed group, publicly denounced us to the press. Now, to be clear, we had feminists in our group. I had always said our group was neither feminist nor anti-feminist and that anyone could join. We were labeled misogynist, racist, anti-gay, and anti-trans. I was shocked to say the least. I did everything in my power to make this group as inclusive as possible, and they were dragging our name through the mud and making false claims about us. And if the press ever questioned their claims about us, the logic was always, well, other groups like theirs have behaved badly in the past. And they wanted to call us prejudiced. Their opinions, as slanderous as they were published within every article about us following our debut as a group. I wish that I could say that our group didn't take a hit from this, that we stayed strong to our goals, strong and true to our goals, and that we didn't let the politics of the situation affect us. The simple truth is that we couldn't ignore the politics of the situation. They were winning a PR battle by beating on the drums of panic and fear. By the time our group had the first sit-down meeting with the Ryerson Student Union to make the case for our group, this panic had already set in for some students at the university. We were told by the RSU that there had been multiple complaints that our group would bring misogyny and violence against women on campus. And there were some students who felt unsafe by our presence. We made the case as best we could. We presented our group as an egalitarian group where everyone was welcomed, but this wasn't enough for the RSU. We were criticized for not labeling ourselves feminist. Our group was criticized and labeled as a potential breeding ground for misogyny. They claimed our constitution didn't guarantee the safety of students from potential harm that could be caused by our group. Worst of all, they claimed we violated the RSU policy about promoting violence against women. If you don't know where this is headed, let me sum it up for you. We were denied club status harder than your high school crush. You know the one. You ever walk into a room and notice the air is so thick that you know there's people in there that don't like you? That was what my first meeting with the RSU was like. I'm pretty sure I saw one of the board members give a chuckle when our group was announced, but I'm pretty sure she'll never admit to it. My beliefs that the RSU were against us from the start were confirmed true following our initial rejection. We tried to amend our constitution to meet their recommendations, but it didn't work. They just reiterated their previous concerns. They actually advised me to meet with other equity centers to help us amend their constitution, but none of them would meet with us. To top it off, they created roadblocks during our appeal by extending the appeals process for nearly the whole year. They did this once by diverting their decision for almost 2 months due to the winter break. The other time they did this was by alerting me at the last minute to an appeal hearing that was happening the very next day, essentially giving me no time to prepare or to cancel my previous appointment and forcing me to reschedule. This went on until our final appeal was denied. Yeah, the backlash against our group was so bad that it affected our executives in a very bad way. My social media exec, Alex, faced criticism from people within her journalism program who ostracized her for her role in our group and created much anxiety for her. My events coordinator who had initially remained anonymous for fear of backlash against her, eventually quit following our initial denial, due to anxiety over the backlash and fear that her identity would be discovered eventually. Even I began to break. I began to juggle everything at once, and it deteriorated me. I took on the responsibility of the events coordinator and started to try to set up events myself while fighting the RSU for club status, waging a PR battle, trying to keep my other exec positive so that we wouldn't crumble to the ground as a group, and keeping up with my schoolwork. If it hadn't been for Cafe offering us their space and support, we probably wouldn't have made it through the year. Meanwhile, every day during this, my name was being dragged through the mud. To give you an example, I remember one particular event around the time we were making our appeal to the RSU's initial rejection. I was walking through campus when I saw an event being held by the Feminist Collective. It was called Take Back the Campus, and it was just an event where speakers could come out and talk about their experiences being discriminated against. It was an open space on the street where anyone could have stopped to listen. I was just on my way home and I didn't have time to stay long because I had an essay to write the next day. But I was still curious about it, so I stayed for one speech. I silently listened in the back of the crowd to an Indigenous woman speak, and when she was done, I clapped and went home. I honestly forgot about it till that night. Till that night when the phone rang. When I picked up the phone, it was a reporter asking me why I had attended the event. Now, I didn't really understand how this reporter knew that I had attended the event or why it was relevant until I saw the newspaper the next day. Turns out, someone within the collective saw me that day and leaked it to reporters that I had attended. In the article, executives of the collective claimed that my mere presence made them feel unsafe. Even the RSU's Vice President of Equity said that she was glad that I didn't do anything destructive, that was her word, towards the event, and that she was glad I understood that I needed to leave. I'm sure many of you can see the pattern here. They were creating and perpetuating a culture of fear towards my group by painting us as monsters out to wage war. It was so bad that our events had to be held in secret for fear about the potential repercussions against our members. With all the hostility and fear towards the group, I felt like I was constantly on the defensive. It must have been around December, just before we were denied for good, when I started to drink heavily. It was around this time when all of this was starting to really get to me. I felt like I had no one to turn to and like my group was crumbling to the ground. I sought refuge in a bar, and that became the place I'd drown away my own anxiety when the week was through. I had never had this type of relationship with alcohol in the past. It affected my grades, and it affected my ability to perform as president of this group. I'm just lucky that I've gone back to casual drinking now because I was in a pretty dark place at the time. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring that up today. I really debated myself, but ultimately decided that if I want people to open up about men's issues, I should at least be honest about some of mine. Anxiety and depression have been a lifelong battle of mine, and they still are. I had to drop 3 courses all year as a result of this downward spiral, and I didn't get to graduate on time. I still have to finish those 3 courses. I'm hoping to go back in January to do them, because I simply didn't have the energy to go back this month. I should have asked for help when I needed it, but like many other men, I thought I could handle it on my own. All in all, I think our group had 5 events, 2 of which were speaking events, and the others were more social in nature. For anyone wondering what sort of crazy anti-woman speaking events these were, the first was about men's mental health and childhood trauma. The second was about gender identity and the LGBTQ. Not nearly as many events as I would have liked to have had. So where are we today? Well, thanks to Cafe and Justin Trottier, We were able to get in contact with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, who launched a court challenge on behalf of us to reverse the RSU decision. It is my hope that we are successful and that this will open the doors for other groups like mine to form. Other than that, the group has been in a self-induced coma. After launching the court application, I just don't have the energy to go on as president. Our social media pages remain inactive and my executives have moved on with their lives. I wish I could offer you a happier ending and tell you I'm strong enough to continue this, but the truth is I'm not. And I hope you can forgive me for that. That's not to say I haven't learned a thing or two along the way. I learned that opponents are inevitable. So long as you stand for something, no matter how good and true you think it might be, there will always be someone or something that will oppose you, and you just need to accept that. This is especially true when it comes to gender politics. It's better to anticipate this opposition and prepare for it than to ignore it until it confronts you. That said, the best conversations are open ones. So it's good to make an effort to meet your opponents and offer them a seat at the table, because they might not be your opponents for long. Just don't always expect a change of heart. For those of you thinking of starting a group, it's not hard. Even a monkey like me could do it. And there are people out there who can help you.
Hey, don't chip shots on yourself, eh? It's hard enough on yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, talk to your campus administrator and they'll guide you through the process. Cafe was an excellent help for me, and I hope they'll continue to help other men's issues groups being formed around the country. Our future truly depends on these issues being talked about more and addressed. Entering the realm of gender politics isn't easy, especially for new groups like mine. With all the nastiness going around, it's important for anyone who wants to get involved to have a good support system and to keep their mental health in check. If you want to have a good example of this, just look at what SFU's Advocacy for Men and Boys group was able to achieve. They were not only able to achieve club status at their university, but they pump out events quicker than fast food. They even have a crew of very dedicated individuals who all support each other. And I know this because I stayed in contact with their leaders and have closely observed them. Really, they should be the ones up here talking to you all, not me. The final point that I want to make is that getting involved is never a waste. I know it may seem like I think my group was a failure, but the truth is that it wasn't. In generating all this controversy, which is the thing that I had tried to avoid the most from the beginning, my group was able to open up a dialogue on men's issues across the country and even around the world. The topic of our group's status was in every newspaper across the country, a few foreign ones, and even some panel discussions on TV. People were talking about men's issues. The RSU thought that by shutting down our group, they were shutting down our voices. Well, they must have used a megaphone to do it, because everyone heard us in the end. Thank you.
Arriola, everyone. Wow, brave man. Let's give him another hand. All right, so we got time. We have 15 minutes for a Q&A session with Kevin. We have a mic over here you can line up at. Please keep your comments and questions to around 30 seconds. And let's get started.
I didn't catch all your speech. I'm kind of floating back and forth between rooms, trying to provide the best coverage that I can for these ultimately important, for this ultimately important conversation. I'm going to point out something about failure. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The only people who truly fail in life are those who do not try." So you did not fail. I'm also going to point out what about Edison and discovering the light bulb. He said that He didn't discover he didn't fail 2,000 times. He discovered 2,000 ways not to make a light bulb. All right, so he did not fail. I take a little bit of an issue with you being hard on yourself. Like I said, no chimp shots on yourself with the monkey gun on it.
Thank you.
All right. So, do you think that there will be a resurgence of interest at Ryerson, given its proximity to the University of Toronto and everything else?
Yeah, I think there will always there's definitely going to be a left-wing sort of feminist universities in the country. So I think if Ryerson's probably going to be one of the last strongholds, just because of how the culture is made up there. But there are small pockets like me who, believe in that men have issues and that want to talk about that. It's just right now we're pretty much a tiny person against a giant tsunami, and we're just trying to scramble to survive, I think.
Why don't you ask Karen if she wants to come out and give another lecture here at Ryerson? They loved it so much last time. Take care, man. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for your speech. He kind of stole a little bit about what he came up with it first, but, and how it's not true. And you've asked for forgiveness for having to step down. I personally, my comment is I don't see it as quitting. You needed to do it, and there's no shame in that. It's about not only getting a group going, but keeping yourself going too, because yeah, these things happen. It's attacked systematically, and there's no way really to there's no fault of your own about how things turned out. In fact, you did a very risky thing. It ended up showing up and people got scared,
Yeah.
But it's normal, and I think you did a real good job of opening up the dialogue. People heard you, and it's still going on, so good for you on that.
Thank you.
I have something to say that's sort of similar. I don't think you quit. In fact, you're here and we're benefiting from your experience. I took notes. I'm gonna take what you had to say back to our group, because we have a number of university students. We have one university professor. They're all afraid to be seen. They're all afraid to really get out there. In fact, when we have to put posters up, I switched the McGill and the UCAN ones, so they're putting on the other campus, even though it's like a small world. So your experience and your wisdom and all the groundwork you laid is now going to come back to Montreal, and we're going to be able to put it into place. So if you have anything else specifically you want to say, or if maybe I can get in touch with you later as a resource for emailing for other advice.
Sure, of course.
It.
Yeah, no, I guess just to kind of reiterate my initial point, I think the most important thing is that if they do plan to get involved and start a group, that they have each other's back, because that's, I think, the most important thing, and I think that's what makes SFU's group so successful, is that they really have a strong community there, and that's probably one of the things that we lacked, is that we had just people who were scared and who couldn't come together, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to keep this quick. First of all, congratulations on doing this public speaking thing. You did a good job.
Thank you. It's terrifying.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, regarding the more personal story where you were talking to your mother and explaining this group to her and trying to convince her, presumably you were talking to other people.
Yeah.
And like convincing them that this group was a good idea. Now, my question is, from the talks you were having with people, how well do you think they were convinced, and were you in contact with these same people during the course of the smear campaign, and were a number of more eyes open wider than before, to bring the Matrix analogy from the last talk?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the biggest things that helped me out in convincing people and sort of resisting this big backlash and kind of simmering some of the anger was I changed a lot of the wording that I used. So instead of using words like men's rights, I focused on men's issues, because, you know, men's rights kind of create, like, it's one of those polarizing words where, you know, people take sides, whereas men's issues, like even feminists, who I know, like a lot of people here have a lot of criticisms about, you know, they at least agree that men have issues, even if they do blame the patriarchy for it, right? So I think just focusing on the men's issues and not really, and kind of like anytime that they would bring up, well, what do you think about abortion? Oh, well, you know, that's a separate issue. We're not touching that issue. We're just here to talk about men's issues, you know, and yeah, just changing the language and changing the words and just framing the conversation in a certain way really helps out, in kind of like getting people to have positive reactions, I guess. Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things that helped me.
Reading back to what was happening during the early women's liberation movement, and knowing that there was a sort of sibling movement called the men's liberation movement, and how over the decades they've still been changing the language and changing the language and changing the language over and over again. I'm not too sure that the language was the main problem, because again with the smear campaign, in another few years you're going to have to change the language again, and nothing's going to stick around.
I don't know if
open-ended. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I completely agree with that. You know, simply because when you can get people away from thinking about this as men's rights, when you can get them away from, like, what do you think about feminism? If you can just say, I don't have an opinion on that, and just get them to focus on what really matters, which is men's issues. Like, if they ask you, oh, what's your group stance on feminism? We're not really focusing on that. We're talking about we're talking about suicide victims. We're talking about boys that aren't learning in school. When you can shift the conversation, I think that kind of pulls people in, and then you can start opening up like the more controversial ones as you go along, just because it's better to find, what I found was it's better to find the common ground and work with people on that than it is to like battle them on the stuff you don't agree with. I don't know if that answers anything, but yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
You remember me from out in Ossington?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, this isn't a question, it's a public affirmation. If it were easy, anybody could do it.
Yeah.
So congratulations on what you've accomplished.
Thank you.
I have grandchildren your age. And so when I comment with a lot of experience with this. When I was your age, I set out to change the world. All these years later, I now realize that if I've touched a few people, I've probably done some very good for them. And when Karen actually quotes me in a keynote address, it tells me that I've accomplished something. So you've accomplished a great deal. And you've touched the people in this room. And you touched me. And none of us will be the same as a result of this. So thank you for what you've done. And we'll go out and we'll touch other people with the message you've given us. So it's a public affirmation. Well done. I personally, speaking as if I were talking to one of my grandchildren, I personally am very proud of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I actually have a question for you, Kevin.
Sure.
So you mentioned a couple times that, well, many times you painted a pretty vivid picture of the kind of struggles and how perilous it can be on a university campus to trying to create a club like this. Through my endeavors working with students, one-on-one. It's such a difficult time when you're trying to focus on your studies to try and focus on advocacy work. You mentioned a couple times that CAFE provided some relief in that way. I just wondered, what was the most helpful help that CAFE gave you that made it a bit easier to work on this?
Well, Justin Trottier is not here, but he was actually a huge part of the reason I was able to continue. Really what it was personal support. The cafe offered a bunch of other things. We were offered space and materials, and they were just such a great sponsor for our group. But really it was just knowing that there was someone that I could talk to. Justin's been in the rink for a long time, and he can take a punch, and he knows exactly what I'm going through when I tell him that, they're saying this about me, and I'm going through this stuff, and he really helped me, stay focused on the task and just forget about that stuff. Of course, it didn't work completely because I still spiraled a little bit, but it was really just having that personal support and knowing that there was someone there that knew what I was going through and that could offer guidance and just.
We have a few more minutes in case anyone else has any other burning questions they want to ask this young man. Of course, you're gonna be around today for to chat with. Okay, we got some else.
Public speaking is something that some people really enjoy because they've done a bit of studying at Toastmasters, which is worldwide. In case you want to go to Russia or Australia or North America.
Yeah, I heard about that. I actually want to do that someday. The Toastmasters thing, Yeah. It's a good skill to have, obviously.
Yeah, you'll be less nervous.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to speak for 30 minutes without notes. Right? And you can reach bigger audiences.
Yeah.
And who knows how big it could grow, your message, and you have a whole lifetime ahead of you. You could do a lot.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for that Star Wars convention where I could be. I just really want to talk about it.
After 3 years in Toastmasters, you'll be ready for a Star Wars convention.
All right. Arriola, everyone.